Welcome to the Explosive Strength Podcast with Jared Bidney. Today's episode, I'm going to go over speed training, in particular speed training for athletes, how to get them faster. In this episode, I'm going to cover physics, I'm going to cover results, and possibly how could you get the same thing. So let's get into this. First off, I have trained hundreds, if not thousands, of athletes over the past 17 years, with hundreds of the athletes receiving D1 scholarships, and several of them have gone on to play professional sports. Like Zach Lasky, he was a running back, fullback for Georgia Tech, trained with me in high school, went to Georgia Tech, then had a stint with the Rams. Austin Barnard trained with me in high school, went to Samford University, and was a punter for the Tennessee Titans. Mike Hilton, he's still in the league. He went to high school, then went to Ole Miss, then went to Steelers, and he's with the Bengals. Will Lutz, he went to Georgia State, then to the Saints, and now he's kicking for the Broncos. At one time, he was the highest paid kicker in the league. James Skalski, the middle linebacker for Clemson, trained with me in high school, college, and he had a small stint with the Colts. Joey Blunt's a special teams player for the Cardinals, but he trained with me in high school, went to Virginia, trained with me, and trained with me right before he went to the Seahawks. He left the Seahawks next year and has been at the Cardinals for a while. Jack Seppings, a baseball pitcher, Brown University, went to now high school, went to Brown, now he's with the Brewers. Daniel Blair, pitcher for Texas University, now with the Giants. So Allie Davenport, her name's now Allie Link. She is a professional volleyball player, went to the University of Chattanooga, now plays professionally overseas. Jeff Okuda, the third overall pick in the 2020 NFL draft. Trained me for a small stint. I've trained professional soccer players, professional basketball players, shot put champions. Lily Backus, University of Georgia pitcher. She was named top 50 pitchers in the country for softball. I've had two different high school volleyball teams both win back-to-back state championships. So I worked with a team. They won state championship. Next year, they won state championship. Then another team hired me the next year, worked with them, won state championship. Boom, state championship. Worked with D2 basketball players, won Peach Belt Conference championships back-to-back years. And then also worked with a high school lacrosse team, state runner-up, state champions. That is 6 years of actual champions and results, and the list keeps going on and on. And I pretty much trained or tested more 40-yard dash times than anyone in the world. The NFL Combine was founded in 1982 and typically has between 300 and 335 athletes that attend each year for the last 42 years. And if all the athletes did the 40-yard dash that went to the NFL Combine and they ran it twice, that would be a total of 28,140 athletes tested. For the last 17 years, I have tested 100 plus 40-yard dashes per month. On a monthly basis, sometimes reaching close to 240s tested in a month. So I'm just taking the minimum. 17 times 100, 1,700 times 17 years is 28,900 years, and that's just the minimum. So you can see I've trained a lot of athletes. I've seen a lot of 40-yard dash times. I kind of know what it takes to get to the next level, be the next person. So in this episode, we need to get down into sports needs. Does your sports need this type of speed training in order to be successful at your sport? So before we get in that, let's look at how long does the average acceleration last or phase last when sprinting, okay? The average acceleration phase lasts 30 to 50 meters or 32.8 to 54.6 yards for most elite sprinters. If you go by time, the acceleration phase can last up to 5 seconds. So if you have a novice athlete and after 5 seconds, they probably quit accelerating. So the more advanced they are, the longer they can get out in that shorter period of time. So it can last up to 5 seconds if you want to do it by time. So now we have a general idea of how long the average acceleration phase lasts. If you want to go with a minimum in sports, that 32.8 yards, mainly 33 yards. And so if you're running the 40-yard dash, that 33 yards is primarily made up of acceleration, and you got your last 7 yards that could be elastic or whatever you want to call it. So majority of the race is going to be strength and power. The last little bit is going to be, so what do you really need? So now that we have a general idea of how long the acceleration phase lasts, let's see where your sport falls into play, okay? Is your sport strength power-based, less than 30 yards in a straight line? Or is it elastic-based, more than 30 yards in a straight line? Okay, let's look at softball. Softball from first to second base is 20 yards, and it typically takes them 2.9 to 3.2 seconds. Baseball, first to second, 30 yards, 3.8 to 4.2 seconds. To jump on a fly ball, add about 15 to 20 yards to track down the ball. So the more you can get up and go, the easier it is to get to that ball, to track the ball, if you're playing baseball, if you're playing softball. Okay, so now your average American football play for the NFL is about 4 seconds. Even your high school teams are about 4.5 seconds. The 40-yard dash can determine draft status in the NFL. So again, if most of your test is acceleration, we need to kind of focus on what accounts for acceleration in order to be a better athlete, to get better draft stock. The basketball court's only 94 feet, which is 31 yards. And sprints in soccer, so like if you're playing soccer, whether it's in the U.S., in the States, whether it's overseas, sprints in soccer generally range between 10 to 30 yards or 9 to 27 meters at a pop. So they're may be running the whole game, but they may have to sprint 10 yards here, 10 yards there, 20 yards here, but it's still less than 30 yards. The Australian Rules Football, or AFL, they test the 20-meter test as their version of our 40-yard dash test. So if they're looking at scouting players for the Australian Rules Football, they're looking at what their 20-meter time is, because that short distance sprint is going to be critical to what their performance is. Now, I've had some guys that have ran a better 20-yard dash and had other guys, say if you got one that runs a 2.8820 and another one runs a 2.9020, the 2.88 may not be the best at the end, but he still was in the best on that short distance. So what I'm trying to say is, if you can still generate enough power, your quick first step, how to get from here to there. Where do I need if I need to track someone out, if I need to get up and go, I need to have horsepower. In volleyball, sprint, speed, and jumping are related. The faster you sprint, generally the higher you jump. So as we can see, most sports fall within the acceleration phase of sprinting, except for track. And you got to understand that track is a sport itself, which has an acceleration phase, a maintain phase, and a deceleration. So you got acceleration, maintain, and a deceleration phase, and the 100-meter for track is what I'm talking about. And which is an elastic energy is gained through doing plyometrics. So a lot of times you'll see these sport teams or try to mimic what they're doing at track, because that's where most of your research is done at. So they're trying to do these A skips, their B skips, and maybe some bounds and some things like that. What they're trying to do is they're trying to increase their elastic capability, because in track, 100 meters is a long way to go. And so in doing plyometrics, elastic energy accounts for 50 to 70% of the track race. So most of that race is going to be how well or how elastic you are. It does not have a lot to do with strength determinants. Now, I've had a lot of football players over the years, and I try to advise people that if you go to track, everybody thinks that track's going to make them faster because they get better at the 100. They do get better at the 200, but they're training the elastic side. They're training that last 7 yards of the 40-yard dash, if you want to look at it that way, but they're training 70% of what's going to make up their track time. So I've had kids go from running a 4.88 before track season to running a 5.2 after track season. A guy who runs a 4.7 runs a 5.1 after track season. I've had guys that wouldn't believe me. So if they got time to come in and train with me for maybe their sophomore year, and at the end of the sophomore track season, if they see they got slower, the next year going into their junior year, they won't do track. They'll spend time in the gym training and make sure that, because they're not trying to go to college for track, they're trying to go to school for football. And so if they get there, and if I have time enough to teach them, then we can see what the real results are. So although you cannot sprint without some type of elastic involvement, it's not the main contributing factor for most sports, because most sports fall within 30 yards or less. If you're a linebacker, boom, you got to fill the hole. If you've got to track down a ball, if you got to steal a base, whatever it is, those are just some examples. And so I have here stuff from the NSA, National Strength Conditioning Association. And what it says, I underline this, there is some question whether the mastery of technique is important for athletes that are not preparing for track and field sports. Again, that was in the NSCA book, the National Strength Conditioning Association. So it also means that during the first 12 to 15 meters, the athlete will focus on primarily front side running mechanics. So, and also, there are not many positions or sports positions or sports where the athlete will be sprinting more than 12 to 15 meters in a straight line, 13 to 16 yards. So if you have to, if you're not running that 30 yards straight ahead and you've got to run and turn, so like if you are running the first and you go to second, it's called curved linear running. And so you're dead sprinting first, you kind of run it. And as you make that loop around first base, you have to accelerate again. So your ability to accelerate is going to be your main determining factor if you can get up to speed and time enough to steal that base. And this goes on further to say, this is critical too, because if you got athletes that are not tuned in and highly focused on what you're doing for sprinting, so like if you do want to teach sprint mechanics, if you want to make your athletes look better, you make them look better, but they're not going to be much faster. And it says drills performed imperfectly or before the athlete is physically or technically ready to perform them may reinforce bad technique, which will have a negative impact on an athlete's speed and could lead to injuries. So if you got athletes that are not focused in on trying to really perfect those drills, they're just kind of going through the motions to do the drills, you could actually impact and have a negative impact on their technique, which could even have a further slowdown effect on the athlete. Okay. Technique training, like to sprint faster, you need to improve force against the ground and the rate of force development. Again, you need to improve your rate of force against the ground to sprint faster. And so there was just that packet from the National Strength Association. And sometimes when people are tracking like flying tens, they're getting the elastic component of the sprint with not necessarily the acceleration phase. And so if you do have an athlete like I did that was faster than the other athlete in the 20-yard dash, but almost got the same 40-yard dash, maybe a tenth slower, then you could want to work on that to kind of clean up the end. But you have to understand, you have to get your sports needs. And once you get that first bit out of the way, once you get your maximum acceleration down, I don't think I have it, but usually if you run a 2.7 or 2 something into 20, you're going to run a 4.7. Usually your last half does not change that much between 20 to 40. The biggest chunk out of your 40-yard dash is going to be that first half. Even for baseball players, is usually about 40 seconds. So whatever they run into 40, if they run a 4.8 40, they're going to run a 6.8 60. So I've had significant impact on baseball players running to 60. A lot of athletes, especially if you got soccer players, you get tested in a 20 meter. If you got 20 meters, 20-yard dash, your softball girls, all that has to do with the ability to accelerate. And so with acceleration, we need to kind of understand physics, and that. So I kind of wanted to break this down. Okay, so we need to break down acceleration. If you just look at the formula, acceleration is velocity over time. And if you do not understand physics, you're like, how does it even kind of relate? They don't even say anything about speed. So we're going to talk about how it does relate to speed. Acceleration, so that's the formula. A equals V over T. Acceleration is velocity over time. That's just a formula. Let's look at the definition. Acceleration is the rate of change of the velocity of an object with respect to time. So the rate of change of the velocity of an object with respect to time. In this case, the object is the athlete. So let's understand velocity and its relationship to speed. See, velocity and speed are very similar, basically brothers. And so velocity is displacement over time. So if you want to look at the velocity formula, velocity equals displacement over time, or D over T. There's the formula. Here's the definition. Velocity is the rate in which an object changes its position in a specific direction. And so in physics, velocity and speed are related, but they are not. But they are calculated differently. So, like I said, they're like brothers, although they use the same units. So the velocity and speed use the same measurements: miles per hour, meters per second, kilometers per hour. But velocity is displacement over time, and the speed is the rate at which an object covers total distance regardless of direction. And so that direction where velocity kind of gets into play is kind of where it gets tricky. So the speed formula is speed equals distance over time, where velocity is displacement over time. And so those are your two different: distance over time and displacement over time. One changes from a V and one changes for S. So V equals Velocity is distance over time, or displacement over time, and speed is distance over time. And where we get the difference is, just so they can do simple math or physics formulas, is when you're talking about velocity and displacement, if you run, say, 400 meters all the way around the track, and if you start at the start line and you run all the way around that track and you end up in the same spot you left, your velocity was zero because you didn't move anywhere according to the velocity formula. But if you were to go around that track, that 400 meters, and you were to get back to that start, speed's going to count for how long it took you to get around that 400 meters. So both did 400 meters of work. One's going to count for the time around the track, and one's going to look at your displacement. So like if you went 10 yards to the right, 10 yards to the left, your displacement is zero, where the speed's going to be determined how long it took you to go 10 yards left, 10 yards right. So that's kind of where the physics stuff can kind of get confusing. So now that we know that speed and velocity are basically the same, it helps us to understand the acceleration is the application of external force, because force is the push or pull on an object that can be caused, or that can cause it to accelerate. So force is going to cause the push or pull on an object, which is now the athlete. It causes that thing or object or athlete to accelerate. So where do we get this force? Force, as we all know, is mass times acceleration. So force is also a physical quantity that causes an object to accelerate, like we just learned. Again, the object in this case is the athlete. So how do we get more force? We have to get stronger. And so in order to produce more force, we have to get more strength. And in this book here, this is talking about shot put. So shot put and bench press are highly correlated. So a shot putter improves, if a young shot putter improves his achievement in the bench from 50 kilograms to 150 kilograms, the athlete has a very strong basis for better shot put performance. But in this case, it's not if the bench press gain is from 200 to 300 kilograms, in spite of all the efforts of making such tremendous increase in bench press strength, the shot put does not go up. Why does it not? Well, the athlete simply has not enough time to develop maximum force. So once you have the strength required and your strength quits working for you, getting stronger is still a good answer. You just now have to increase your rate of force development. By definition, explosive strength is the ability to exert maximum force in minimal time. So now that we're getting stronger, once we pass that threshold to where that strength may or not be a factor, and what you were seeing in this, and I didn't bring it here with me, is this does not tell you how to increase that explosive strength. If you want to look at characteristics, so if you're trying to develop the characteristic of explosive strength, you look at explosive strength, over here it's going to draw a line. So you got contrast methods. What are the two contrast methods that can increase explosive strength? Well, you have plyometrics and you also have reactive methods. So plyometrics or reactive methods are contrast methods that help create or increase explosive strength. Well, if you know you're an athlete and you have to get from first to second or second to third or home to first real quick, or if you got to track down a fly ball, or if you got to make a break on a soccer ball, or if you need to try to fill the hole if you're a linebacker, if you got to cover sideline to sideline, if you're a linebacker in the middle of the field, if you're in the middle of the field, you only got 25 yards to the right or 25 yards to the left, you're still in the maximum acceleration phase. So that contrast method of elasticity, which is plyometrics, does not account or even go to you. And so a lot of people, they don't know the difference. They don't know that there's contrast methods or reactive methods called static, dynamic, heavy light, load release, and pneumatics. So those four things can help increase explosive strength in an athlete if the strength is needed in a shorter period of time for like the shot put guy. So how would you incorporate explosive strength training or neuromuscular adaptation training for that shot put guy? You would have him do Paul's benching because that's a static dynamic method. Just like box squatting, a static dynamic method. A static dynamic method will increase absolute strength and rate of force development at the same time because it calls on specific demands of the nervous system. And if you're not lifting heavy enough you got to lift within a certain, like the brief maximum tension method with the contrast or reactive methods in order to get maximum benefit out of them. And so you have to cover this book. Boom. You have to cover other book that I did not bring, but I've got it so memorized that I don't even need it half the time, but I kind of like to read so that you just know I'm not making up this BS. And so if you're got to go from home first. You don't need that explosive strength from elasticity. You need that explosive strength from your reactive methods. You have to react. Like if you see a linebacker or a fullback, you got to fill the hole. You got to react. Reactive methods will help increase explosive strength. What are they again? Static dynamic. That's your box squat. That's your pause bench. Load release. Heavy light. You can use a heavy dumbbell, then go jump without a weight. By using a heavy light method like that, you have turned on the nervous system a little bit more than you would have. So by that heavy load performed immediately after, so if a light, okay, shot put, the greatest achievements in shot put were two heavy shot were followed by one of standard. So if you do a heavy squat or if you do a heavy jump with a dumbbell, then you go over there and jump without the dumbbell, the nervous system is able to still be in that heightened state from that heavy stimulus and perform that lighter, non-loaded weight much better. So that's why the greatest achievements in shot put were thrown with two heavy followed by one of standard, because now you're able to operate in that prime mode. And so if you continue to operate in that prime mode, that's called training, you have to do it over and over and over again, because the SAID principle, specific adaptations to impose demands. You have to continue to impose the demand on the body to perform that specific task that you're asking for it. So specific adaptations to impose demands. If you do not demand it out of your body over and over, you can't go in and box squat one day, front squat the next day, and so forth and so on, and expect great results. You also cannot just move the weight too fast. If you're moving at 7 meters per second or anything like that, you're not enlisting the brief maximum tension method. Again, when you lift at certain heavy loads, you're getting optimal discharge frequency out of the nervous system. So you got intermuscular coordination and you got intramuscular coordination. So you got the muscle cell itself, the primary mover of the lift, but you got the entire body helping that primarily intramuscular. Inters in the same cell, intras within the whole system. So now instead of just that one isolated movement, you have the entire body conjoining together to try to get that one desired result, whether it's to throw a baseball, whether it's to sprint, whether it's to bench press more. A lot of times when you bench press, if your butt comes off the bench, you're getting your entire body, you're an athlete. You don't have a concentrated effort on a football field or lacrosse or soccer. You have to do a lot of stuff and you have to demand that optimal discharge frequency out of the nervous system in order to produce that desired result. Now, if you were to box squat, say sets of 10, you're using a static dynamic method, which increases absolute strength and rate of force development at the same time. Rate of force development is also known as explosive strength. So you can create explosive strength by using a box squat. So if you look at this book over here, and box squatting, okay, so power. Power is equal to force times distance per unit of time. However, if we keep the distance consistent, like the box squat, so you're not going from a 12-inch box to a 14-inch box, he said. So like if you're doing a regular squat, you're going down and you're standing up, you're using elastic energy to get you back up. By doing a box squat, you're breaking up the eccentric concentric chain and causing more neural drive. So you got more alpha motor neurons pulling that fiber to overcome that task. So static dynamic method is a method of squatting. And to do that, you have to actually sit on the box. So like if you see people that touch and go the box, they're squatting to a box, but they're not box squatting because you have to allow the eccentric concentric chain to break up its action so that you don't have as much energy stored. So the energy stored on the way down and come up with, you're allowing that kinetic energy to dissipate so that you have to overcome that action dynamically with a lot more effort. And we use a soft pad to create that. If you do it to a bench, you're going to keep that energy storage a lot longer. By using a soft pad, it'd be like in a padded room. That padded room absorbs the voice, so you don't have as much echo off the wall. And so by using a soft pad to sit on instead of a bench or a harder box, you're allowing the energy to get out of the body quicker. And so by allowing the energy to dissipate the body, you're having to have more neuromuscular demand to get off the soft pad. It'd be like getting off your couch versus getting off your kitchen chair. It's a lot harder to get off the couch than this chair because you actually sink into the pad. So if you keep the distance consistent, like box squatting, you're not changing different heights every time. You're always going the same height every time. You can substitute strength for the force, since the force comes from our strength. Remember what we said about acceleration? Force comes from our strength. Therefore, the formula can be written as power equals strength over time. Instead of force times distance over time, you got power is now equal to strength over time. The greater amount of strength you can display in a certain period of time, the greater your explosiveness will be. So again, the greater amount of strength you can display in a certain period of time, the greater your explosiveness. And so again, we're having to work on acceleration, going from point A to point B, and you're learning that you have to have great strength to cover a certain distance, a certain amount of time. But if that strength's not coupled with contrast or reactive methods, you're not going to get the desired result that you think. You can say, hey, we tried the box squat. Was the load heavy enough? We could try Paul's benching. Like the shot putter, we don't say in this book, once he got from 50 kilograms to 150 kilograms and he increased his shot put distance and he goes from 200 to 300, he still increased his strength, but now you have to still, once you start becoming more elite level strength status, you have to find out where those methods are in order to decrease the rate of force development within a short period of time. And so it's not always covered, and you have to look at so many different avenues to figure out these points. But so again, shot put can use Paul's benching to increase because that's a static dynamic method with that. So hopefully I covered most of that with what I wanted. And so now what have I done with this? So now that I know that there were several years ago with the American College of Sports Medicine, they produced a study that said, and they did it on Division II football players, the athletes that squatted 2.1 times their body weight were significantly faster than those squat 1.9. So the 2.1 group outperformed the 1.9 group in the 10, the 20, and the 40-yard dash. Well, anything less than 40-yard dash is acceleration. So remember, what's your sports requirement? Do you run more than 15, 20 yards in a straight line? The acceleration phase can last 30 to 50 yards. So if you can continue to accelerate that 1 to 5 second range, there's no point in working on the elastic part unless you just want to waste time and look cool. So, and so here's some examples of athletes I've trained. Like Zach Lasky, with the guy with the Rams, he gained 21 pounds in body weight and ran it went from a 4.77 to a 4.50. Baseball pitcher, Jack, he came to the gym at a 5.01 40-yard dash. He gained 15 pounds and he ran a 4.57. Brooks gained 15 pounds and went from running a 5.14, 5.17 to a 4.53 and a 4.57. He got 0.6, he got more than a half second faster with a 15-pound weight gain. I had another player. He gained 28 pounds and ran 0.4 seconds faster in the 40-yard dash. So these kids, force is mass times acceleration. So now you have this mass of this athlete that's 28 pounds, that's 21 pounds, that's 15 pounds heavier. So now that mass is heavier, and with their ability to accelerate, they're going to produce greater force. So if you got to hit a hole, or if you lay a shoulder and someone will cross, or if you're a linebacker, you're hitting someone with so much force. Or if you're playing basketball and you're that much stronger and moving a little bit faster, people don't like to deal with people that are strong because they're harder to deal with. And so people always want to work on this cool skill and things. Skill is fine. But if you have skill and you lack physical ability is strength. So you can have strength and not work on your skill and not be good. You can have a lot of skill and no strength, and you're still the same person. You're just on the opposite end of the spectrum. So whoever can put skill with physical ability together, you're going to have a much more successful athlete. So these people that's playing baseball or whatever year-round, they're not spending enough time on actually increasing the physical ability. I've got baseball players this year have gained 12 miles an hour in swing speed by increasing the bench press, because bench press is correlated to swing speed. And so over time, you could see that they're not even swinging the bat. I've had a football player that looked absolutely horrible swing a baseball bat. He swung at 74 miles an hour, and you got some of your high school kids that's going off to college to play baseball. They were only swinging the bat 68 miles an hour. So you got a kid that had no clue what he was doing, god awful swing mechanics, but yet he was out swinging the baseball players that did it. So if you were to but he also outbenched him by 115 pounds. So if you would take that strength of that football player and give it to that skill of that baseball player would outperform that football player at the same strength level because they worked on their skill and their physical ability. And so, and over time, that now that we know that explosive strength is power or strength over time, and by using, because if we keep that distance consistent, now we can kind of formulate where the box squat ratios came from, because box squatting, sprinting, let's look at this. Yeah. This is science of sports training. Squats are generally considered sport-specific to the exercises for sprinters because they directly contribute to improved sprinting performance. Okay. Now, if you got a squat, that study where their athletes squatted 2.1, outran the 1.9 group, that was just general squatting. That was the ability to produce that amount of force, and without the static dynamic method, without the contrast methods, without the ability to manipulate the nervous system to create that explosive strength, that's just general strength, and that 2.1 group still outperformed that 1.9 group. And a characteristic of an elite sprinter is the ability to squat 2.1 times their body weight. So you have to be strong to be able to sprint. And, like with the ability to accelerate, look at Bolt. Bolt has very elastic, won a lot of gold medals, won a lot of sprints, but sometimes at 50 meters, he's at the middle of the pack. He's not always ahead the entire race. And so he had the low ability to accelerate. So imagine if you were to increase Bolt's ability to accelerate a little bit better with his elastic capabilities, how much better of a sprinter he would be. Now, you got to learn how to squat these athletes in order to get these results. You just can't go in there like someone saying they squatted sets of 10, their squats will slow you down. Of course, it'd slow you down if you don't have a strength coach that knows how to use different methods. It's not the exercise that you're looking at, it's the method behind the exercise. So if you got squats, they're directly correlated to sprint performance to a point. Okay, that 2.1 times your body weight, you're still outperforming 1.9. Both groups are considered fairly strong. But now if you take that 2.1 group and you had them box squat where the distance is consistent, you are doing now strength over time. And what we can do is you can further eliminate what the cause is of whether or not running the correct 40-yard dash or not. And so I had a kid come, he got heavier and he got stronger, but we're not tracking the ratio. So what I did over time is I came up with the box squat ratio. So I know if an athlete squats 1.7 times their body weight at 6 meters per second. So now I've taken the box and we have it at 12 inches with a soft blue foam pad on it. Because the box is too high, we're not getting the thing. So the thing about box squatting and squatting in general, why does it correlate to sprint performance? Well, single leg, if you got like a Bulgarian squats may help strengthen your adductors, but anytime you throw like an acrobatic balance style application or something, so with a Bulgarian squat, a lunge, you're throwing a little bit more balance in there. The more balance or try to figure out stability exercises, like with the dumbbell bench and versus the barbell bench, anytime you add stability to the exercise, you're dampening the effect of the nervous system because it cannot fire at optimal discharge frequency because now it's got to worry about balance. Once you got a stable base, you can actually increase the neuromuscular function a lot better because you got a better stable base. But the more unstable you are, the less you're going to get out of the nervous system. So that's why you'll see, that's why you won't see Bulgarian squats. That's why you won't see these other exercises translate as much. And so what I've done over time is I've seen that how much it's helped these athletes. They're getting 6/10. I probably didn't even go over all these athletes. I had a quarterback at Georgia Tech. He went from a 501.40 to a 4.78.40 with a 7-pound weight gain. I had a kid, he went from 220-pound body weight to 240 pounds. He gained 20 pounds. He knocked off 0.7 of a second with a 20-pound weight gain. He went from a 30-inch vertical to a 40-inch vertical. Had a kid, he went from 215 pounds, running a 4.88 to gaining 8 pounds and running a 4.53. Had another kid who went from a 5.28 to a 4.75, a 28.1-inch vertical to a 38.1, so a 10-inch vertical improvement, a 0.4 of a second improvement on a 40-yard dash, and he went from 165 body weight to 185 body weight. Again, another 20-pound gain. So I'm actually adding mass to these athletes, and we're producing and getting faster. So it's not admirable to have a 150-pound kid run a 4.8 40-yard dash. No, if you got a 220-pound kid, which one would you want on your team? Would you want a 155-pound kid running a 4.8, or would you want the 220-pound kid running a 4.8? He'd be a wrecking ball on your football team, and you'd be successful just because you had that kid that can run over absolutely everyone. And so what I've done over time is to try to figure out what the limiting factor is. So when you're doing squat, if you're squatting on a box squat with a pad, I have my kids take their shoes off. Or if they have lifting shoes, they need to wear the same shoe. You need to eliminate variables when you're training. And so the more variables that you can eliminate, the better off you'll be. And when you sit on the box, you have to sink into the pad. You have to let that kinetic energy dissipate. If you just touch and go, you're squatting to a box. You're not box squatting. Very, very different things. And so regardless of weight now, if you fall in with these ratios, you will get your desired 40. And if you're not getting your desired 40 when you fall within those ratios, then maybe we have to look to some other things. What's the limiting factor? And so the whole ratio thing has been what the factor is. So I don't have my other chart here with me, I don't think. But I want to go over these ratios. I did have here's that thing with the, nope. All right, didn't bring that. So I could chart it out, but typically if you squat 1.7 times your body weight, you're going to run a 4.7 40-yard dash. So this kid right here, he weighed 185 pounds. He squatted 1.70 and ran a 4.78. So that 1.7 ratio, he squatted 1.7 times his body weight at 0.61 meters per second. And it yielded a 4.78 40-yard dash. He weighed 185 pounds. Now let's look at another kid that ran. Here's another kid. He squatted 1.70, the exact same as the other kid. He ran a 4.77. So a 4.77 versus 4.78, basically the same thing, except for this kid weighed 220 pounds versus the other kid's 185 pounds. And so the same kid that ran, when he squatted 1.6, so a 1.6 ratio is going to yield about a 4.8 40-yard dash. A 1.4 is going to be in the 5 range, and a 1.5 is going to be basically a 4.9. 1.6 is going to be a 4.8, 1.7, so forth and so on. And so it's pretty mathematically down the line. So the same kid, he squatted 1.70, ran a 4.77, and when he increased his squat strength to 1.77 times his body weight, he ran a 4.73. Same kid. Okay, we can start this whole kid off. When he squatted 1.63, he ran a 4.88. When he squatted 1.7, he ran a 4.77. When he squatted 1.77, he ran a 4.73. So you see, as we got closer to that 1.8 times his body weight, was getting closer and closer to that 4.6. And so over time, you could see this kid squatted 1.68, almost a 1.7, but his 40-yard dash was a 4.83, almost a 4.7. So they're pretty much falling right in line with everything going over here. Like that 1.58, almost a 1.6. The kid ran a 4.91. Very, very close on these ratios. Even a kid weighs 249 pounds, squatted 1.46, ran a 5.02 40-yard dash. So by allowing the box squat with the soft pad, we're increasing our explosive strength and our absolute strength at the same time. So that strength gain, just like that shot put example I tried to give earlier, he got his strength to a point to where the increase in strength did not help because he was not working on how quickly he developed. Because when you do a shot put, it's boom. It's just that initial oomph till you got it. And so the more power you can generate in that given period of time, the greater achievement you're going to have in whether you do. So the same thing with a baseball swing. You only got from point A to point B to get it. And the stronger you are using the contrast reactive methods, the better you will be able to perform in your sport. So I try to throw some physics in there to help you understand what acceleration is, try to help you understand what velocity is and how it relates to speed, because acceleration, you have to have great force production because everything's within a time limit. So whether it's velocity, if the velocity was in a straight line, then it's a time, but it's kind of confusing, but they have to do it for formula purposes. So hopefully you got it. But if you didn't, feel free to reach out to me, info@explosivemechanics. Explosive Mechanics on Instagram, Explosive MEC on X, Twitter, or whatever. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Hope you learned something from this episode.